At last year's Disrupt, we established that the enterprise was sexy. So, we've moved past that. Now
you just have us.
Now we just yeah, that's right. But now we actually have a little bit more analysis around how the enterprise is really going to move forward with some of the companies that you've started and some of the investments, Scott, that you've made. And one of the things that I want to start out with was that you wrote this post on TechCrunch about 30 franchises, and basically how companies like Box and Zendesk and Nebula are foregoing being acquired by these incumbents in order to stay independent and in certain areas where these disruptions are happening. So what I want to hear from these companies is actually the incumbents are starting to catch on a little bit. They're starting to launch their own cloud offerings. They're moving into mobile. We're talking about companies like Oracle and so on. Are you guys scared at all? They are. They definitely are.
They definitely have a lot of announcements.
That's right.
But I don't see a lot of customers.
So you don't think customers are going to catch on?
I don't. Why don't I let you guys talk a little bit? But from what I can tell, if you look at across our entire portfolio, not one of our companies is running anything Oracle. The CapEx budgets are 10 laptops. It's not. There is change going on, and the new companies are, they don't have any new customers that are coming up and using their product. So I think it's almost like when the kids are not using a product, that eventually the company's going to die, right?
What's actually interesting though, this is actually a funny point though. They own MySQL, and since they don't leverage any of the things that the kids are using.
Right. True.
So they want to still sell you.
They haven't shot MySQL in the head yet.
Well, they're working on it very slowly. It's more through
slow degradation.
What do you think about Microsoft? You were very, Aaron, sort of anti-SharePoint at one point. I remember the billboard on the 101 and all of that. But do you feel any?
Do you know many people that are pro SharePoint? Is is there a distinction?
Do you feel any heat from that, or do you feel like you've gone into a different direction?
Yeah. So I think that there is there is certainly an evolution, occurring both for us as a company and our customer segment and the kind of companies that we compete with. It's not, what actually happened with our competition with SharePoint is that overall, just the entire ecosystem sort of has been moving on from that kind of product category and product line. So we don't really have to go up against that type of product anymore because it's just less relevant from a competitive standpoint. And I think that's what's happening with what Scott was mentioning on a lot of the other, traditional enterprise products is they're just not as relevant in the conversation for most customers because they're so used to spending too much money, having too much complexity, having too much maintenance, and they're looking at a next generation set of solutions. Now, some of the incumbents are either buying or building some of those next generation solutions, but certainly not a lot of those are in market yet from a true competitive standpoint.
Michael, what do you think about that? Who do you sort of see as your competition, and do you feel any heat from any of the incumbents?
I think there's two ways to look at this. I think that just because Oracle or some of these companies go out and buy software that is designed to be hosted on data centers somewhere is not the same thing as new generation cloud software. New generation cloud software can compete on completely different terms. It's a disruptive sales model. You're leveraging the network effects, and data is kind of a big part of what you're selling. It's not only about getting access to software, it's about getting access to a lot of data about how using that software. So I think there's a different approach, and there's a difference in kind of DNA. It's not about just acquiring some software that is hosted on a data center. It's about your whole kind of approach to a new generation of software users.
I want to put a fine point on that, Nicole, because I think if you look at Microsoft and you look at Oracle and how they've typically innovated, they had no idea how people were using their software. You shipped software that resides on a PC or software that is installed on a server, and you try to figure out how you have a focus group. You're looking over somebody's shoulder to see what they're using. both Aaron and Mikkel know every click that's going on with their software. They know, like when they roll out a new feature, they know exactly how much the users are using it, and it's almost like cell division, right? Like people are using it, they want more of this, so we add more to that part of the feature band. And the old companies are just not used to that kind of development cycle. They're not used to real time seeing every little thing that's going on with their software, and these guys are. And so the innovation loop is 10 times faster than what Microsoft or Oracle were used to.
Yeah, to double click on that, I think when you have one product, one instance of your product, one service, and you can focus all of your energy on just that, all of your energy goes into that. Whereas if you have a company like Microsoft or Oracle, where you have every one of your products, every version installed in every possible configuration, you have to put so much energy into maintaining every way in which that's being used by your customers and every possible thing that it's been integrated with. It dilutes your effort.
So,
I don't know if you can tell, we care a lot about this.
Just a little.
We probably spend too much time thinking about enterprise software.
so you saw Oracle partner with Salesforce earlier this year, and a lot of people thought that was kind of an odd thing, but
It's all the bug.
Yeah. Do you see yourself, any of your companies, ever doing that, doing something similar to what Mark Benioff did?
What did he do?
Well, partner with an incumbent. I mean, would you ever consider something like that?
Something like buying a lot of Oracle hardware.
I think we would probably do whatever could make our customers more successful and help us grow faster. I think that's when sort of your principles about incumbents begin to sort of go away a little bit. And so I think absolutely we would do that kind of partnership. And we work with many of the largest enterprise software and hardware companies specifically because they are trying to find new ways to get into the market. I mean, the Oracle partnership was with Salesforce was actually incredibly strategic because it all of a sudden sort of neutralized some of the conversation that they were the antithesis of cloud solutions, because how can you be sort of against the cloud if you're actually working with it? And that was an important strategic bet and move that they had to make to change the conversation. And I think any one of us would probably do that as well.
Scott, you had a reaction to that. I'm just curious what that was.
Well, I don't think there's a natural partnership there with these type of companies. I think, if you were to look at like Mikkel's company, they have a great relationship with like Good Data and other SaaS companies. The SaaS companies have natural APIs so that there's not a question of we need to put a suite together. The companies can naturally hook in and get the data that they need out of box or out of almost any of the SaaS providers. So I don't see any natural partnerships with Oracle or Microsoft going on. There's a lot of Barney, it's like I love you, you love me type of things. But there's like when you look into the substance of it, I'm not really sure what they're doing.
Chris, I want to talk a little bit about a point that you've made when we were talking earlier about the ecosystems and how incumbents are defined by the ecosystems that they've created around their products, and your companies will also be defined by that ecosystem. And Scott, you had sort of made that point as well.
Yep.
Could you elaborate on that?
I mean, I think one of the attributes of a franchise is the ecosystem around it. And if you look at recent events like VMworld, for example, as it relates to some enterprise software, that whole ecosystem of companies reinforces the value proposition of that product and reinforces what customers are able to do or not do with that product. And so what I think you'll find around Nebula and OpenStack, which you'll find around each of our companies, is a different ecosystem emerging that complements our products and exposes their attributes to the customers in a different way.
What's the big difference between VMworld or Oracle's ecosystem and the ecosystems that you are all trying to create?
So, this is a hint for. Were you going to talk, or because? Okay, thank you. I think the biggest difference, or there's probably two big differences that we see in the Oracle ecosystem. It's a bunch of companies building add-ons to Oracle or slightly modifying those traditional products. In our world, our ecosystem is how do you take best-of-breed companies and have them integrate together, like what Scott was saying. So you now have the ability to have sort of this cloud stack of tools and technologies that let customers mix and match their best-of-breed systems and have them finally integrate with one another. That just wasn't possible in the era in which Oracle and Microsoft and others, kind of rose to dominance. And so now you actually can have these technologies that work together that allow you to have a lot more innovation, that allow you to have a lot more competition, and it's actually changing the nature of what the ecosystem around your company even means. And I just think that the traditional incumbent technology vendors also don't know how to attract the sort of next generation of applications that are being built for the mobile era, the cloud era, and that's just a changing DNA of how you go work with those kinds of ecosystems that a lot of the incumbents don't have today.
You'd also have to say that if you go to a VMworld or kind of many of the older incumbents, half of the ecosystem are these ridiculous service companies that have to, implement these, like Oracle Financial is an 18-month ridiculous process. Whereas, how long does it take to get your customers up and running?
Yeah, it's a week.
A week. So you don't have that same, like that half of the ecosystem doesn't exist at Boxworld, for instance.
Well, yeah, so that's definitely like the internet is definitely a new platform for a new generation of companies. That's where we look for our APIs and for integrations and like considering the internet your platform just makes things so much easier. And it's challenging the traditional way of thinking about best of breed versus what is the other, like versus what? What is that, like a single vendor, single platform, or is it just a single vendor that has many different, like we can look at Oracle and all the products they have. Going with an Oracle strategy is not going with, it's about a sales relationship rather about a product relationship, because they have, hundreds and hundreds of products, and none of these products are, particularly well integrated.
Right.
So it's like the single vendor relationship, the single platform relationship is much more about a sales relationship than about a really technology relationship.
That's a good segue into what I want to talk about next, which is sort of how that sales model has changed for you, and how you feel that the next generation of sales is really going to drive a different type of innovation.
Yeah.
And I know you all sort of employ or deal with the sales model in all of your companies. Aaron, why don't you talk about your sales model?
Yeah, sure. So I think the sales model has just been entirely inverted. So the 5 or 10 years ago, the sales model was you would hire this army of salespeople, and they would go out into customers, and this would be a very sort of be a very sales heavy process with the customer. You'd have a person show up and they have a briefcase, and inside their briefcase is another briefcase, and they were like super
and
sales.
A golf bag too.
They have golf bags and gold rings, and it was just crazy, right? So that was sort of you would show up to a customer like that and you'd kind of go pitch your product, and it would take 18 months to implement the product, to even find out if it even worked, and you'd be very disappointed to know how much money is wasted, and even the government on just failed technology deployments, because that was the sales process where we spent billions of dollars to then finally realize that product wasn't actually going to do the thing that we intended it to do. Today, now you can start using any one of our services in 5 or 10 minutes, find out if it's actually going to work for your organization, which means that by the time a salesperson is having a conversation with a customer, they've already implemented the product in some way in the organization. They're already finding out that they're going to be successful, or this is the right kind of solution. So it changes the competitive dynamic. I mean, the way that we do product management, the way that we do marketing is often more resembles a consumer internet company, even though we have a sales force that goes in after there is adoption and usage of the service and technology.
One point is a lot of the tools that were used back in the 90s as weapons, competitive weapons like APIs, are now being opened up and are being used literally as the mechanism to reach customers. So Amazon Web Services APIs, for example, the APIs that you all have in your products are open, they're transparent, we're encouraged to build on them and integrate with them. Whereas if you look at where a lot of the issues that Microsoft had with antitrust, they were around manipulating unfairly these APIs so that it was difficult for competitors to latch on. And I think that's a very interesting, this idea of open being enabling. I mean, people aren't going to buy a Nebula system because some little startup is building some great way to do infrastructure. They're building it because it's the best way to take OpenStack, which is the most successful open source project in history, and get it running to power your infrastructure, right? If we go away, there's still an open thing you've built everything on. And I think that's a very different kind of dynamic.
Yeah. So companies like us, where we have Box and Zendesk, where we have a much more kind of bottom-up sales approach than a top-down sales approach to our customers. It's really about getting adoption within the user base, first and foremost, getting the actual users, as in the consumer world, to love the product before you start
Just
kind of...
very different. I mean, that's all the consumerization of the enterprise.
Completely. But it also talks to kind of, like, we have customers, we have companies where they have hundreds, maybe thousands of users, where there's not really that traditional kind of vendor-company relationship. And it also talks to that the new enterprise world is much more volatile than the traditional kind of enterprise software world. And it also talks to that, like, the level of disruption we're seeing now is just going to accelerate and go even more crazy, and incumbents are going to have drastic falls very, very quickly.
I want to switch gears a little bit to a point that Scott
I think you're right.
about staying independent. And I've talked to all of you separately, and you've made it clear that you want to stay independent. And Aaron, you particularly turned down an offer from an incumbent, Citrix.
I just turned out an offer from Aaron.
Okay. So I'm glad to repeat the cycle very quickly.
500 million a few years ago, around that.
Cannot comment.
But tell me
No,
about
that was just a joke wink. It wasn't a real wink.
tell me about that decision of turning down that offer, and was that a turning point for your company?
Sure. So without talking about the specifics of that situation, basically we got to a point where we looked at the sort of forward-looking potential of the category that we were in, which is helping businesses manage all of their information in the cloud, or the most sort of critical content that they work with in the cloud. And we looked at sort of where we were as a company, and to what we've been talking about, the amount of change and transformation that's going to happen in this space, and how quickly we expected that to happen. We thought there was still 100x kind of potential and growth for what we were trying to do. And when we looked at where we were and how much we had accomplished relative to what was possible, and what we ultimately wanted to do, and the sort of window of opportunity that we felt existed right now in the enterprise space, we just decided that we want to make sure that we are focused on building an independent, sustainable, long-term company. And that's sort of where we are, and I think where we all are as companies, which is this opportunity to be able to go create the next generation of sort of foundational technology companies. And this is sort of Scott's 30 franchise point. This comes around every couple of decades, right? This existed in the 90s with some of the sort of software providers that were building, some of the key client-server franchises, and we saw a lot of what happened with that. Oracle ended up buying the PeopleSofts and the Siebels of the world, and it happened in the 80s with some of the operating system and some of the hardware vendors of the Dells of the world. And we are now seeing that same kind of opportunity today, where the next sort of franchise companies are going to be created, and we're going to be creating them in a more modern, in a very different kind of way. And in 10 years from now, we'll be talking about sort of what's disrupting this set of franchises. But for now, this is the window of opportunity that we saw. And we wanted to make sure that we could build a long-term company that takes advantage of what is a very rare and infrequent process in technology.
Scott, I mean, how do you know whether a company, you're evaluating investments.
Sure.
How do you know whether a company has the opportunity to be a franchise like one of these in the future?
So, first of all, it depends on just how's the company growing, what's the customer satisfaction with that company, how much are the customers, most of these companies that are becoming franchise players are, most of it's being spread by word of mouth. One customer is on Zendesk, is so excited about how differentiated it is, how easy it's made their customer service organization hum, and how quickly the customer service reps came up to speed on it. These people talk, like they move around companies, they say, hey, why aren't you on Zendesk? What happens, a company will acquire a company and they'll say, hey, you need to get on my customer service system. And they find that they're, like when you pry my cold dead fingers off of a Zendesk, we'll move over, and it ends up that the small company ends up converting the big company because the product is just so much better. I want to go back to your original point as to why, why shouldn't these guys sell? And because, by the way, like the incumbents are in outright panic mode. Like they are paying acquisition premiums in, like the double digits. And I think there's two main reasons. If you look at the market caps of Workday and Salesforce, and even kind of, like even NetSuite, like there is a pot of gold on the other side of them there hills, right? And if you can stay the course and you really can dominate your space, be number one in your space, there is a real opportunity to build a franchise. And I think the other thing is there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are rolling out of these incumbents that did get acquired, and the incumbents had no idea what to do with the technology. It was just so different. The salespeople couldn't sell it, and they've watched entrepreneurs, and they know, I'm sure you guys know, other entrepreneurs that just watch their baby die within this large company, and you just, like, you have a culture, you have a, it's a community that you've built within these companies, and you want that to endure. And I think the combination of both of those things is keeping them from, making that leap and making that acquisition.
By the way, though, it's probably the best time ever to sell your company. So, so all that being said, you will get a great
To
premium.
start
Yes.
an enterprise company or just a company in general?
Well, enterprise specifically, because there's 750 billion to $1 trillion in enterprise sort of IT market cap that those incumbents realize is going to go away if they don't find a way to get into these categories, and they're going to be doing a lot of acquisitions to make that happen. And so this is going to be a very great space for Scott and for many people making investments and people starting companies, because there's just so many of these opportunities today. So you can either go build a company, or you can you bring your company to a larger incumbent. There's a lot of opportunity all
I feel
around.
like you're hedging over there. Is there something I don't know about?
No, not at all. I just want to be promotion. I want to
I just want to let everybody know you can sell your company.
It's also a multi-trillion-dollar industry in disarray, right? If you look at how Facebook manages a data center, I was reading in this 38 Franchises article.
Right.
It rained in a Facebook data center because
Right.
they pushed the limits of what you could do with cooling so far.
Yes.
That water condensed and everything blew up, right? So I think what's fascinating here is the way internet companies run hyperscale infrastructure has changed the entire economics of large-scale computing, and I would be surprised if in 10 years, most companies that are successful and around and are in the Fortune 1000 don't have one thing that they think of as so critical to the future of their business that they don't take their infrastructure as seriously as Facebook. And I think that's what we're all faced with, is the opportunity to power that future of computing.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the exciting thing about why enterprise is so interesting and why this disruption in IT is so creates such a big opportunity is to Chris's point around how much change is happening in every industry, whether that's healthcare or manufacturing or retail or media and entertainment or financial services or insurance. Every single space is experiencing some level of disruption because of technology. The things that are going to power those companies' reaction to this wave of technology is going to be from the enterprise software industry. It's going to be from the hardware industry. It's going to be from companies that are building technology for those businesses. And it's going to be coming from the next generation of IT buyers that are going to use these technologies to help power their businesses. So, we often get very focused on the technology industry and how much change there is going on in the technology industry of the Oracles of the world and the SAPs and the Microsofts of the world. But the only reason that's happening is because the customer landscape is changing so dramatically, and that's what's creating these new sort of step functions in opportunity right now.
The gap here, when you have 300 million photos you're trying to store a day on Facebook, that changes the entire way you think about storage. It changes the way Seagate and Hitachi and all the companies that support that ecosystem think about that. And if you talk about Exadata and what it costs to store data in an Exadata system, you might as well call it Exadollar, right? The gap is so huge. Innovation must result from that gap.
Are some of those those big problems you're talking about, storing all that data? I mean, those are huge problems. They're problems that more engineers now are excited to tackle. Scott made a point in the post about how talent is going to be an issue, and getting great design talent, getting great engineers. That's something that you guys are all going to have to face when some of these engineers want to go to Facebook or Google or the hot new messaging startup. Do you feel like you face that problem, and how do you?
Yes, that is a problem. The big difference between how we're building our companies from how the traditional enterprise software companies built it is we're going after the exact same engineers that a Google or a Facebook or another consumer internet company is going to be going after, because we're building sort of web scale services that require sort of the next generation way of how you build applications. And so that means that we are squarely in the same camp as people with hundreds of billions of dollars in market cap that are going to be going after those kinds of individuals. And the way that you solve that problem is that often we like to think about it as we are building the sort of, for any consumer-oriented engineer, we will be the most enterprise software like company that they've ever worked at, and for the most enterprise-oriented person will be the most consumer-like company that they've worked at. But so what that means is you're not really, if you are a sort of a web scale, web developer, mobile engineer, you're not giving up on the sort of scale of users that are going to use your product, and the big difference is that they're going to be using it in a business environment, being more productive. But you still get to have that same kind of impact on the world that you would if you were at a consumer company. So I think it makes us more competitive than we would have been maybe 5 or 10 years ago if we were just doing deep enterprise software.
If you walk into Box or if you walk into Zendex, these don't feel like walking into IBM or even Salesforce for that matter. Like, in order to hire these mobile developers, they have their choice of where to go. You have to have a culture that really values design and and product design. And I just don't think the incumbents are going to be able to hire and retain those folks because it's never been a priority to them in the past.
Well, it's a good note to end on. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, cool.